Hello everyone, this is Pico Entertainment and we are back again, and we're going to talk now boxing. Now it's been a very long time since I've done a boxing video. If you go to my channel you'll see a playlist long of boxing videos that I used to do regularly, but of course following the COVID-19 outbreak the sport came to a standstill, and whilst there was a lot of rumours and speculations, certain fights were being promoted or broadcast online, they never came to fruition. And when you follow the sport for a while, you know what's true and what's basically rumour and speculation. And as I've stated many times on this channel, I'll only invest in a story or an article when I believe it's actually going to happen, rather than follow the trending talk or the rumour or the speculation. So that's why you haven't seen me do a boxing video for a while. Now I do know that the boxing has slowly got itself back on its feet again. Most notably, we've seen Eddie Hearn with his fight camp now. I believe this is now the third or fourth week now that we're into it, and we saw last week of course Frank Warren put on the card as well, involving the likes of Carl Frampton as well. So the sport is slowly trying to get back into the swing of things, but of course it won't be able to fully function, or it feels it won't be able to fully function again until it's able to have crowds back at the fight, because as we all know, boxing is one of those sports that relies very much so on the revenue and the gate receipts from the crowds that turn up to the fights. So this video really is just a revision again of the preview of the fight between Dillian Whyte and Alexander Povetkin. Again, if you check out my playlist channels, the boxing playlist, I already did a preview for this fight when it was scheduled to be around, I think it was March or April it was scheduled to be around, before the COVID-19 hit. And in that prediction I stated that I believed Alexander Povetkin was going to pull off a late round stoppage, and I'm still going to stick by that prediction. Now it's very difficult to make a structured prediction of this fight, because obviously the fighters have been on a break for so many months now, so it's very hard to gauge what sort of conditioning they'll be in. When I made my prediction back on the first preview video for this fight, it was on the basis that I looked at Dillian Whyte and how he performed against Marcus Wack on the AJ versus Andrew Ruiz rematch bill in Saudi Arabia, and he really looked out of sorts, he looked out of condition, and he really struggled to get that win. And I thought at the time, if Marcus Wack had come in with a bit more better conditioning and a bit more desire, that he maybe could have taken Dillian Whyte out. I particularly look at maybe the 7th round and the 9th round in particular. You know, Marcus Wack really had Dillian Whyte in a lot of trouble, and he just wasn't up to the challenge of pushing through. Now we all know Dillian Whyte of course had a 6-month absence because of the whole drug test scandal involved after the Oscar Rivas fight. I'm not going to go into that now, but just because you're absent from the ring, it doesn't mean that you have to come out of condition, right? You always should stay in condition and stay in shape whether you're fighting or not fighting. So when I saw, you know, the fact that he was out of such shape, it highlighted to me a kind of lack of discipline. And I just think that against Alexander Povetkin, who, okay, he's 41 years old, but he's experienced, he's been around the game long enough, and he's a very tough, resolute boxer, even at this late age. I just think with a dangerous opponent such as that, you know, it's a potential scenario where Dillian Whyte could come unstuck. And if we look at the previous fights of Dillian Whyte, his last 3 or 4 fights, they've really been life or death encounters. If we look at the Joseph Parker fight, the 2 Derek Chisora fights, and the Oscar Rivas fights, you know, those are fights where Dillian Whyte is knocked down or he's really hanging on later on in the rounds, particularly the Joseph Parker one. And yeah, had that fight gone on for another 30 seconds to a minute, Dillian Whyte probably would have been taken out. And I believe he lost the first Chisora fight, and despite Chisora getting a point deducted in the second fight, I think Chisora was also winning that fight before Dillian Whyte knocked him out in the 11th round. So he's always been on the edge, Dillian Whyte, despite the fact he has improved in his technique and his performance since losing to Anthony Joshua. There's always that case where he's susceptible to getting hit, he's susceptible to getting knocked down, and yes, there are still issues regarding his endurance and stamina. Maybe youth will play a part in it as well, because obviously at 41 years old, Alexander Povetkin is also going to have maybe issues of endurance and stamina, particularly if it goes into the later rounds, and the rounds preceding those are very intense, back and forth, high energetic rounds themselves. I mean, we saw Alexander Povetkin also on a Saudi Arabia bill against Michael Hunter, where he got a draw. Many people thought Michael Hunter got the win, or should have got the win. So I just think the fact that Alexander Povetkin had a much more of a tougher fight on that night against Michael Hunter than what Dillian Whyte did, and he gave a much better account of himself than what Dillian Whyte, it just still leads me to believe that with his experience as well, that he may defeat Dillian Whyte in a late round stoppage. But we will wait and see. I mean, it could turn out the other way, where Dillian Whyte could beat Povetkin in a late round stoppage. Because both fighters have been out of the ring for such a long time, I expect the first couple of rounds maybe to be a bit cagey. They'll both be a bit hesitant, a bit circumspect to start trading. But once they get into the swing of things and they start letting the hounds go, I think we'll get a much more of an exciting fight. We also, of course, have the rematch between Katie Taylor and Pearson as well on there. The first fight was very exciting. It was a draw in the end, or Katie Taylor won, but many people thought Pearson won, and I believe it was actually a draw overall. So that'll be interesting. That probably could be the best fight of the night, if I'm being brutally honest with you. Katie Taylor's always exciting. Her fights are always back and forth. She always comes forward, throws loads of punches. Her fights are always exciting to watch. So I believe we'll also get another really good fight on there as well. But what's really interesting about this, I think, more so than the heavyweight landscape, because I don't think this is a fight that has any bearing on the heavyweight landscape going forward, because we already know Dillian Whyte is mandated to fight the WBC champion Tyson Fury. Whether that will still be the case after Tyson Fury fights Deontay Wilder again in their rematch. We also know that Anthony Joshua is mandated to fight Pulev for his IBF belt. So regardless of what happens with this match here, we know that Dillian Whyte will not be fighting Tyson Fury or AJ in his next fight unless there's an injury. But if everybody else stays fit and healthy, then Dillian Whyte will not get his mandatory shot probably till next year now. So this fight really doesn't have any ramifications or long impressions on the heavyweight scene currently as it is, where many people regard Tyson Fury as #1 and AJ as #2. So it will be interesting to see what happens if Dillian Whyte does get the win, what the speculation will be, what fans' reactions will be regarding his status. Will he indeed have another fight if he does win in the interim before he gets his mandated shot, which I believe the WBC stated he must get that shot by February 2021. So yeah, very interesting to see. And also regarding the box office numbers, now I think they've done very well in this fight camp not to make the fights pay-per-view straight away. I think that would have been very insulting to the viewers to be expected to pay pay-per-view prices straight away after coming off such a long absence from the sport. But eventually I think they've put this on pay-per-view because, well, it was due to be pay-per-view anyway, but they have to recoup a lot of the budget and the cost that it's accumulated from setting up this fight cap. Because remember, this is all coming from Matchroom's and Sky's own budget, isn't it? So they have to try and recoup that somehow. Now, I didn't think they were going to do this on pay-per-view because of the lack of the crowds and lack of atmosphere, so maybe it diminishes your viewing experience, but they're still going ahead. So we'll see how many numbers they will produce in terms of the pay-per-view. I've seen other Eddie Hearn interviews where he said the Dillian Whyte Oscar Rivas fight did about 300,000 pay-per-view buys, so that's the kind of region they're looking in there towards. And yes, Dillian Whyte has consolidated himself as a pay-per-view fighter, and his fights are very exciting to watch, as I mentioned before. So it'll be interesting to see if they're successful here. Will it motivate them to then push ahead with the Anthony Joshua fight behind closed doors, or if it doesn't do as well in the pay-per-views, will they then delay the AJ fight and wait and see until they get the okay from the government to put the fight on with certain crowds involved? So it'll be very interesting to see what happens there. But that's my quick, really limited review of the Dillian Whyte Alexander Povetkin fight. I'll try and upload this as quick as possible, but again, I've already done a preview of this fight, which you can see on my channel as well. So yeah, I just believe we'll get a late Povetkin stoppage, but who knows, it might be the reverse and we get a late Dillian Whyte stoppage. So those are my thoughts on Alexander Povetkin versus Dillian Whyte. Let me know what you think in the comments below. Are you very excited for your fight? Do you think this should be on pay-per-view? Do you think it should be free to air? Do you think it will have any implications or ramifications in terms of hype or trends or just current discussion in the overall heavyweight scene if Dillian Whyte produces an impressive performance? Or you don't think it will produce much relevance? Because at the end of the day, if we're being brutally honest, the biggest fight that everybody wants to see is Joshua versus Fury. Nobody can deny that that is really now the big super fight within boxing. So those are my thoughts for now. I will provide more boxing videos as we get speculation and reports that actually come to fruition, and we get more fights coming up in the long run that are high profile, and maybe the bigger pay-per-view events as well. So those are my thoughts for now. Take care of yourselves, stay at safe distances, and I will see you very, very soon.